He sat in a quiet hall where the first light of dawn crept through the paper windows, drawing pale, trembling lines across the polished wooden floor, and in this soft glow, the ancient world of Japan seemed to breathe through every silent beam and worn tatami mat. In such moments, he felt how the past loosened its grip on time, allowing forgotten truths to rise gently from the depth of centuries, just as mist rises from a mountain river. The samurai of old understood this silence, for their world, woven from the constant tension of war and the fleeting calm of peace, demanded that a man know not only how to fight, but also how to stand unmoved before the storms of fate. And long before the clang of armor or the whisper of steel, there was always the inner search, the search for a center, a point within the human being where chaos could not reach. This center did not arise from philosophy alone, nor from ritual, nor from the teachings of sages. It grew from the raw experience of life, from the fear that tightened the chest before battle, from the uncertainty that came with each new dawn, and from the realization that no sword technique, however perfect, could save a warrior whose spirit trembled. The early samurai lived in a world where danger lay hidden behind every tree line and political intrigue flickered like unstable fire. And in such a world, a man instinctively reached inward for something unshakable, something that no enemy could touch. Generations of warriors learned that this still point existed somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of thought, emotion, and flesh, and that only by finding it could they meet life without hesitation. Those who mastered themselves spoke of this center not as an abstraction, but as a living sensation, a quiet gravity pulling the scattered elements of the human being back into unity. They noticed that when fear dissolved and the breath flowed naturally, the world around them changed its rhythm, softening the edges of tension and sharpening the awareness of every sound and movement. In those rare moments, a warrior could sense how his own life was linked to the pulse of nature, the movement of wind through bamboo, the rolling of distant thunder, the slow passage of clouds across the sky. And as he learned to return to this inner point again and again, he discovered a power untouched by panic and untouched by doubt, a power born from harmony rather than force. From these observations grew the early notion of Hara, the depth within the lower abdomen where equilibrium could be found, where breath settled, where the mind anchored itself like a ship in the quietest part of the harbor. Here, in this subtle inner region, a man discovered that strength did not come from the arms, nor from the shoulders, but from the silent foundation of being itself. And it was this understanding that shaped the earliest teachings passed from one warrior to another in whispered conversations during long journeys or sleepless nights in the barracks. Hara became the beginning of every movement, the source of every decision, the hidden birthplace of courage. As dawn brightened in the hall and the paper windows glowed with warm pale gold, the idea of the center revealed itself as more than a survival tool. It was a way to restore order in a fragile and unpredictable life. A samurai who knew his center could walk through turmoil without losing himself, for he had learned to find the unmoving point behind every trembling emotion. And it was from this quiet realization, this ancient awareness of the stillness beneath life's turbulence, that the deeper philosophy of the center began to unfold, leading naturally to the understanding that the center does not live in the individual alone, but echoes through the very structure of the world around him, awaiting exploration in the next chapter.
He remained motionless for a long moment, listening to the soft murmur of the wind as it passed along the wooden eaves of the temple, and in that subtle sound he sensed the echo of a truth older than any samurai clan. In the rhythm of the air, in the shifting of faint shadows across the floor, lay the reminder that everything in the world possessed a center. Mountains stood unmoved because their mass was anchored deep beneath the earth. Rivers carved their way through valleys because their flow originated from a single source high in the mountains. Even the stars moved in silent harmony because the vastness of the cosmos held them within an invisible order. The samurai, observing these patterns, understood that man could not be an exception. Just as the universe had its heart, so did the human being, and without this inner core, he drifted like a leaf caught in a restless stream. The Japanese tradition placed this human center not in the head, where thoughts flickered and dissolved like passing clouds, nor in the chest, where emotions rose and fell with the shifting storms of life, but in the lower abdomen, in the deep, quiet space known as Hara. Within this region lay an ancient truth recognized by generations of warriors, monks, and craftsmen. The body's stability, the breath's natural rhythm, and the mind's calm all converged there. It was the place where tension settled when life weighed heavily, and it was also the place where strength rose when action was required. The more one listened to this inner space, the more one realized that Hara was not simply a physical point, but a meeting place of forces that shaped the entire being. He recalled stories of masters who taught their students to feel their weight sinking into the earth, to let the breath descend into the lower belly, to move from that depth rather than from scattered impulses. They described Hara as if it were a small universe contained within the body, a quiet world where breath transformed into presence and where motion arose without strain. They believed that man remained whole only when he acted from this place. For to act without Hara was to act without harmony, and action without harmony led inevitably to imbalance, conflict, and exhaustion. Through this understanding, the samurai discovered that the human being mirrored the order of the natural world, and that the stability found in mountains and stars could also be found within oneself. Hara carried deeper significance than physical balance alone. It represented the point at which human life connected with the larger currents of existence. In this philosophy, man was not an isolated being fighting blindly against fate, but a small but meaningful part of a living universe. The breath breathed through him as naturally as wind moved across the plains, and his heartbeat echoed the quiet rhythm of the world's hidden pulse. If he strayed too far from this rhythm, confusion took hold. If he aligned himself with it, clarity returned. This is why so many teachings emphasize the need to return again and again to Hara, not as an exercise, but as a way of being. Even in moments of great uncertainty, when political alliances shifted and the tranquility of daily life fractured under the weight of conflict, a samurai who carried his center remained steady. He understood that just as the world possessed cycles of creation and destruction, human life too carried its own rhythm, and only by grounding himself in Hara could he maintain his direction. In this way, Hara became not only a physical and emotional anchor, but also a cosmic one, a reminder that the individual life was inseparable from the broader harmony of the universe. As he sat in the slowly brightening hall, the scent of cedar drifting through the air, he felt how this philosophy linked the smallest gesture of the human body with the vast movements of the sky. The world outside the temple stirred gently with morning life, and in its quiet awakening, he sensed how all things were tied to their own center, each fulfilling its own place in the great unfolding of existence. It was this recognition that the center exists everywhere and in all things that led the samurai to look beyond himself, to see how the inner and outer worlds intertwined, guiding him naturally toward the understanding that the center extends not only within man and cosmos, but into the fabric of society itself, waiting to be explored in the next part.
He remained seated in the wooden hall as the morning gradually unfolded beyond the temple walls, and the layered world of Japan awakened with the faint rustle of leaves and the steps of monks beginning their daily tasks. Within this quiet transition from darkness to daylight, he sensed how the idea of the center extended far beyond the borders of the individual body. For the samurai, Hara was never merely a private refuge or a personal discipline. It was a reflection of how all things, from man to community to the universe itself, were bound together. Every warrior who sought to cultivate his Hara eventually discovered that true balance could not be sustained in isolation, for no man lived apart from the currents of society or from the wider rhythms of the natural world. When he contemplated the teachings that had passed through generations of warriors and scholars,
he recognized the presence of three levels of the center. The first was the individual Hara, the personal ground upon which a man built his strength, his peace, and his resilience. Without this internal anchor, the rest of life collapsed into uncertainty, for an unstable spirit gave birth to unstable actions. But this was only the beginning. The second level was the social center, the collective heart of the group, clan, or community. Just as the body required harmony among its organs and limbs, society required harmony among its members. And when this harmony was absent, even the strongest individual found himself caught in the turmoil of others, unable to maintain his direction. Samurai traditions emphasized that an individual's inner alignment meant little if he lived in a world filled with discord. The warrior who cultivated his hara but acted without concern for others remained incomplete, for the very essence of the samurai path required a balance between personal discipline and social responsibility. A man was expected to bring stability to his surroundings, to be a pillar when others faltered, and to maintain clarity when fear spread through the ranks. Thus, the social center became a crucial aspect of the warrior's identity, teaching him that his life was not a solitary flame, but part of a shared fire that warmed or threatened the entire community depending on how it was tended. Beyond the individual and the social lay the third level, the cosmic center, a realm that extended into the great and silent movements of nature. Traditional teachings held that human life was woven into the world's unseen patterns, and that every action echoed into the broader currents of existence. Storms, seasons, tides, and stars were not distant forces indifferent to human life. They were expressions of the same rhythm that flowed through the breath and blood of every living being. When a samurai stood beneath the night sky and watched the slow arc of the constellations, he felt the universe not as something separate from himself, but as a vast organism of which he was one small but essential part. This recognition shaped the moral and spiritual code of the warrior. He learned that just as he relied on the world for strength, the world relied on him to act with integrity. Every moment of imbalance within a person rippled outward, influencing others, altering decisions, and subtly shifting the path of events. Likewise, every act rooted in clarity and harmony reinforced the stability of all things around him. This interdependence formed the foundation of samurai philosophy, the understanding that the center was not a fixed point, but a dynamic relationship between self, society, and universe. To disturb one was to disturb all. To bring balance to one strengthened all. As he reflected on these three levels, watching dust motes drift lazily through the sunlit air, he realized that the samurai walked a path that required constant awareness of this delicate interplay. The warrior cultivated his inner calm not only to face the world with courage, but to shape that world through his presence. A community built upon individuals who knew their centers became resilient in the face of hardship, and such a community contributed to the greater equilibrium of the natural and cosmic order. Thus, the samurai saw himself as both guardian and participant, responsible not only for his own conduct, but for the harmony of the world he inhabited. Outside the temple, a breeze rustled through the pines, carrying with it the faint scent of resin and the distant sound of water flowing over stones. In that quiet symphony, he sensed how effortlessly nature maintained its own balance, how each element moved in accordance with forces unseen yet profoundly felt. The samurai, striving to mirror this balance, understood that Hara was the doorway through which he connected with the order that governed all things. And as this awareness deepened, so did his understanding of the subtle force that arose from the center, a force that was neither muscle nor emotion, but something more elusive, guiding every thought, movement, and decision. It was toward this force, the inner current known as ki, that his meditation now turned, carrying him gently to the next chapter.
He closed his eyes for a brief moment, feeling the faint warmth of sunlight spreading across the wooden floorboards. And within that warmth he sensed the quiet stirring of a force that generations of samurai had tried to describe yet rarely named aloud. It was neither a sensation of muscle nor the tightening of sinew. It was not the racing of blood during exertion or the trembling that came with fear. It was something deeper, quieter, born in the same region of the body where breath descended and where the center lay anchored. The samurai called this subtle current ki, an inner energy that moved without sound, guided without force, and existed even when the body stood perfectly still. To understand Hara was to stand at the threshold of this energy. To feel ki was to step fully into its world. He remembered stories from ancient dojos where masters demonstrated effortless movements that defied simple explanation. A small elder, barely able to lift a wooden practice sword, could redirect the attack of a stronger student with only a shift of weight or the soft exhalation of breath. Observers often attributed such feats to decades of training, but those who looked closer understood that the master was not using muscle alone. His strength did not come from tension, but from alignment, from the seamless flow of ki through a body rooted in its center. When he moved, it was as if his intention shaped the air itself, guiding his motion before a single muscle had engaged. The distinction between muscular strength and internal energy became clearer the longer one walked the path. Muscle acted through contraction, through effort and visible strain, and though it could lift weight and wield weapons, it faltered when fatigue or fear took hold. Ki was different. It did not depend on physical condition, age, or sheer force. It was calm even under pressure, steady even when the body trembled. It allowed a warrior to strike without aggression, to block without rigidity, to remain aware even when confusion threatened to overwhelm him. The samurai learned that true power came from removing unnecessary tension, from allowing the body to become a vessel through which intention flowed without obstruction. This inner current, though deeply rooted in Japanese philosophy, resonated with teachings across distant cultures. In India, it was known as prana, the life breath that animated both body and mind. In China, it was called qi, the subtle energy moving through the meridians of the body, sustaining health and guiding movement. Though names differed, the essence remained the same. A recognition that beneath the surface of physical existence lay an invisible force that shaped life itself. The samurai, whose existence depended on clarity of action and moments of mortal danger, could not afford to ignore this force. Through generations, they refined techniques not merely to move the body, but to direct ki with precision, knowing that the outcome of a single moment often depended on the alignment of breath, intention, and inner flow. He reflected on the countless hours spent by warriors sitting in stillness, eyes half closed, hands resting softly on their laps as they allowed their breath to descend into Hara. In these quiet practices, they learned to feel ki not as a sudden surge, but as a constant presence, like the low hum of life that underpinned every heartbeat. With practice, they felt it rise during inhalation and settle during exhalation, merge with movement during training, and expand into the world around them when the mind grew clear. A samurai who found this subtle rhythm discovered that fear loosened its hold, uncertainty lost its sharpness, and the chaos of battle could be navigated with the same calm as still water. In the quiet hall, he felt how this concept shaped not only martial arts, but the entirety of samurai life. Decisions were made not from haste, but from grounded awareness. Speech flowed not from impulse, but from quiet intention. Even conflict was approached with the understanding that victory was not merely the suppression of an opponent's strength, but the dissolution of imbalance. Ki became the invisible thread weaving through all of these choices, turning the warrior's path into something more than a discipline of skill, into a discipline of presence. Beyond the walls of the temple, the wind shifted, carrying with it the mingled sounds of the waking world, the distant call of a bird, the soft rustle of bamboo, and the measured footsteps of a passing monk. Each sound felt connected,
part of a greater tapestry through which ki also moved. As he listened, he sensed how internal energy did not end at the boundaries of the body, but extended outward, linking the individual with the unseen forces of nature. A samurai who understood this connection learned to act not against the world, but in harmony with it, allowing every motion to align with the broader flow of life. The recognition of ki marked a turning point in the warrior's path, yet it was only through disciplined practice that this energy became fully alive within him. The samurai needed to cultivate not only awareness, but embodiment, training breath and movement until harmony became a natural state rather than a fleeting moment. And with that realization, he turned his attention toward the ancient practices that refined this energy, practices rooted in meditation, breath, and the art of centering, which awaited him in the next chapter.
He drew a slow breath as the temple hall settled into a deeper stillness, the kind that seemed to arrive only when the world outside grew fully awake. Within this quiet hour, he felt how every teaching about Hara and ki, every whispered instruction passed from master to student, ultimately led to one path: practice. No amount of theory could replace the steady refinement that came from repetition, observation, and disciplined presence. The samurai understood that harmony was not a gift bestowed by nature, but a craft shaped through lifelong dedication, and at the heart of this craft lay Hara-ge, the ancient art of centering. Hara-ge was neither a single technique nor a shrine-bound ritual. It was a living discipline woven into breathing, posture, and movement, and it touched every aspect of a warrior's daily life. A samurai learned to walk with his weight rooted, to stand with the spine relaxed yet aligned, to let the breath sink into the lower belly and rise again in a smooth, unbroken flow. Even the smallest gesture, the placement of a foot, the lowering of a hand, the turning of the head, was shaped by the same quiet principle: move from the center, not from scattered impulses. With time, this awareness softened the body, cleared the mind, and allowed each action to emerge without hesitation or waste. He recalled how, in old training halls, students sat for hours in silence, their eyes half lowered, their attention drawn inward like a slow tide returning to the shore. The goal was not to empty the mind in the way distant cultures sometimes described, but to let thoughts lose their sharp edges, to allow emotions to settle until they no longer disrupted the breath. Meditation for the samurai was a return to Hara, to the point where the body's weight met the earth and where the breath found its natural rhythm. In this quiet descent, even the chaos of the outside world softened into something distant and harmless, like the murmur of a distant river. Breathing stood at the core of this practice. The samurai learned to inhale not into the chest, where breath rose quickly and faded just as fast, but into the lower abdomen, where it expanded slowly, anchoring the body with each cycle. This deep, diaphragmatic breathing did more than sustain the body; it steadied the mind. When fear threatened to rise, when the mind raced with uncertainty, the breath brought him back to the center, dissolving tension and allowing clarity to return. In combat, this steadiness saved lives. In daily life, it preserved one's dignity and purpose. Through breath, ki flowed without obstruction, guiding movement with a softness that belied its power. He had heard stories of warriors who trained for decades, learning to align breath and motion so completely that their bodies responded before thought even formed. They could step aside from danger not because they predicted an attack, but because their senses and reactions flowed from a place deeper than conscious intention. This was the essence of Mushin, the mind without clutter. Though the samurai rarely spoke of it directly, they simply trained until the separation between breath, body, and intention dissolved, leaving behind a single, unified movement that emerged from Hara like a wave rising from the sea. Hara-ge extended beyond meditation and breathing into the most practical aspects of life. The samurai applied the same centering to tasks such as drawing water, polishing armor, practicing sword forms, or performing the silent rituals of morning preparation. These everyday actions honed the awareness that returned to them in moments of crisis.
a warrior who learned to pour tea with the same calm as he faced an enemy blade, understood the essence of discipline far better than one who trained only in combat drills. Through consistency, breath became a thread that guided him through each hour, keeping him rooted even when life demanded swift and decisive action. Outside the hall, the wind shifted again, sending a soft ripple through the tall bamboo that bordered the temple path. The sound carried a familiar lesson. Nature moved effortlessly because it resisted nothing, and the samurai sought to mirror this flow not through surrender, but through deep alignment. He knew that anger, aggression, and tense anticipation broke this connection, clouding judgment and wasting energy. True strength arose when the body remained open, when breath continued without interruption, when emotions softened into awareness. From this quiet readiness emerged a state that allowed the warrior to meet whatever life brought, whether conflict, loss, or the simple passage of time, with a clarity that others could not easily understand. He realized that the deepest purpose of these practices was not victory, nor the perfection of technique, but the cultivation of a state in which the warrior became fully present. In that presence, the divisions between self and world, between movement and stillness, between inner and outer forces, dissolved. Hara, breath, and ki merged into a single current that shaped not only the samurai's actions, but his entire way of being. And as this understanding settled over him like the soft warmth of afternoon light, he sensed that the path led inevitably towards something even larger, the recognition that the human center was bound to the center of the universe itself, awaiting its final revelation in the last chapter.
He remained seated as the day matured beyond the temple walls, and the hall around him seemed to hold its breath in a calm that felt both fragile and eternal. The teachings he had traced, Hara, Ki, the three levels of the center, the disciplined practices of breath and stillness, now settled inside him like sediment slowly descending to the bottom of a clear lake. In that quiet clarity, he understood that the samurai path had never been merely about combat, honor, or discipline. At its deepest level, it was a journey toward the dissolution of chaos, both within the heart and within the world. The warrior who mastered techniques yet remained enslaved to fear was no true warrior at all. Only the one who met the turbulence of life with stillness could walk the path with integrity. He reflected on the countless samurai who had lived in a world filled with unrest, shifting political alliances, the looming threat of war, the fragility of peace, and yet found within themselves a point untouched by the turmoil. They discovered that the true battlefield was not the open field or the narrow mountain pass, but the unsteady space within their own minds. Every moment of confusion, every surge of anger, every impulse to act without clarity was an enemy capable of defeating them long before any blade could strike. For this reason, they returned endlessly to Hara, cultivating it not as a technique, but as a refuge, a ground from which their entire lives unfolded. Through this inner work, they discovered a truth that philosophers hinted at, yet few fully embodied, that the center within man reflected the center of the universe itself. The same calm that settled in the lower abdomen when breath flowed evenly could be found in the quiet surface of a pond at dawn, in the slow drift of clouds across a wide sky, in the precise unfolding of seasons. As the samurai stabilized his inner world, he began to perceive these external harmonies more clearly, not as separate phenomena, but as extensions of the same order. He realized that he did not exist apart from the world, and that the world did not move independently of him. His breath was part of the wind, his heartbeat echoed the rhythms of the earth, his clarity shaped the way events unfolded around him. In the old teachings, this understanding was expressed in simple, understated ways. Masters told their students that when the center is aligned, the sword moves on its own. When the mind is still, the path ahead becomes visible. When the breath returns to Hara, life returns to its original balance. Such phrases were often dismissed by the young as metaphors, but the elders knew their literal truth. A man who carried his center walked through the world differently. He listened more deeply, saw more clearly, responded more gracefully.
The chaos that overwhelmed others passed through him without scattering his thoughts, and the suffering that burdened many did not break him, for he had learned to meet it with a calm that came from a place beyond ordinary emotion. He remembered stories of warriors who entered battle with a serenity that seemed impossible to comprehend. These men were not fearless, fear belonged to every living being, but their fear flowed through them without taking root. They moved with purpose because they had already quieted the turmoil within. Victory for them was not defined by triumph over another, but by the preservation of clarity in the midst of danger. Even in defeat, they remained whole, for their identity was not tied to external circumstances, but to the internal equilibrium they carried. They had conquered the true enemy, the chaos that lived within. As the hall brightened with the soft gold of the late afternoon sun, he felt how these teachings extended beyond the narrow boundaries of the warrior class. The unity of man and universe was not a privilege of the samurai, but a natural truth inherent in all beings. Every person, regardless of rank or fate, carried within them a center capable of anchoring their life. Hara was not a mystery reserved for temples or dojos. It was present in the way a mother soothed her child, in the patience of an artisan carving wood, in the quiet resolve of a farmer waiting for rain. Wherever breath flowed, life flowed, and wherever life flowed, the center could be found. He knew then that the purpose of the samurai path was not merely to strengthen the body or sharpen the mind, but to create harmony between the individual and the vast world that surrounded him. In seeking mastery over himself, the warrior aligned with the universe, discovering that peace was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of balance. Energy became intention became action, and action became a seamless expression of the underlying order that governed all things. The light through the paper screens softened as the sun dipped lower and the temple hall seemed to exhale, releasing the last tension of the day. In that gentle fading glow, he sensed the final truth of the path, that Hara was the point where man and universe met without boundary, where the distinction between the inner world and the outer world dissolved. A samurai who lived from this center did not move against the world, but with it, allowing every breath to carry the quiet strength of unity. And as evening approached, the lessons settled like the fading sound of a temple bell, a reminder that peace, once found within, becomes the guiding force through which a life unfolds.